Tonight, we drift back to a time when the world was still half dream, half memory, when philosophers spoke of gods and cities that shimmered beneath the sea. Among their voices, one name endures: Atlantis. It was Plato who first shaped the tale, an island beyond the pillars of Heracles, rich with wisdom, power, and divine blood. He called it a warning, yet it feels like a memory. Was it truly fiction, or a truth the world has chosen to forget? In this series, we'll follow that mystery from Plato's first telling to the shining streets and temples of Atlantis itself, its people, its fall, and the quiet echoes it left behind. Each chapter brings us closer to the island's heart and perhaps to our own. So find your quiet place and let the tide carry you there. If stories like this calm your mind and make you wonder about what once was, don't forget to subscribe. Together, we'll keep wandering through the ruins, the myths, and the dreams the sea refused to bury. Long ago, when the world was still young in memory and philosophy was the language of wonder, a man named Plato sat in the soft glow of his oil lamp, writing of a world that no longer existed. The air in his study was thick with thought, the scent of parchment and olive oil mingling as his stylus drifted across the wax. He wrote of gods and men, of sea and sky, and of a city said to have vanished beneath the waves. The tale, he claimed, was not his invention. It came to him like a shadowed inheritance, passed from Solon, the wise traveler of Athens, who had journeyed to the temples of Egypt long ago. There, beneath walls painted with the stories of gods and dynasties, the priests had whispered a secret, a tale of a land beyond the pillars of Heracles, beyond the edge of the known world. That land, they said, was Atlantis, vast, radiant, and ancient even in their time. A place where silver rivers met golden temples, and where the descendants of Poseidon ruled in splendor. It was a city built in harmony, its rings of land and water spiraling outward like the ripples of creation itself. Plato listened through time, letting the echo of that old world find its shape in his words. In his Timaeus, he spoke of its greatness. In Critias, he gave it form. His sentences carried the rhythm of tides, steady, patient, inevitable. He described a city where wisdom guided power, and power was meant to serve the gods. But as the tale deepened, the still water began to stir. For even paradise, he wrote, cannot survive the storm that begins within. The Atlanteans grew proud. Their hands, once devoted to art and worship, turned toward conquest. Their hearts, filled with divine favor, began to hunger for dominion. They set their eyes upon Athens, upon the simple, noble people who lived not for luxury, but for virtue. And so, the balance broke. The gods watched, their patience thinning like light over water. Zeus, ruler of the sky, called the divine assembly and spoke of punishment. Yet, even as judgment loomed, Plato's tone softened, almost tender. He did not condemn the Atlanteans outright. He mourned them. For in their fall, he saw a reflection of every empire, every age, every soul that forgets humility in the pursuit of greatness. Perhaps that is why the story endures, why it lingers like a dream just beneath waking. Atlantis is not only a place, it is a lesson. A reminder that what is built from pride will crumble into silence, and what is lost may yet echo through eternity. In the stillness of his chamber, Plato's lamp flickered. The night outside hummed with distant voices, the rustle of olive leaves, the rhythm of unseen waves. He paused, perhaps wondering if anyone would believe him. Yet he wrote on, tracing a bridge between myth and memory. When at last he stopped, his words lay like a map of the human heart, its brilliance and its ruin entwined. He had not written a tale of fantasy, but of truth, dressed in the language of legend. For Atlantis, he knew, was not gone. It lived in every civilization that reached too high, and in every person who listened for the sea's quiet song. Night deepened around Plato's chamber. The last ember in the brazier glowed faintly, like a memory refusing to fade. His hand hovered above the page, tracing the unseen image of the city he had brought to life, Atlantis, the island that gleamed like a morning star before the dawn of history. He saw it not as ruins, but as it once was, radiant beneath a sky of endless blue. The sea was calm, its waters so clear that ships seemed to glide through air itself. Circles of land and water spread outward from a shining heart, where temples of marble and gold caught the light like mirrors to heaven. In the center stood the great temple of Poseidon, god of the sea, father of the Atlantean line. Its pillars were clad in silver, its roof crowned in orichalcum, a metal said to glow like fire under the sun. Within its walls, the people gathered in reverence, offering white bulls in sacrifice, their voices rising in hymns that echoed across the island's hills. Plato imagined the people who lived there proud, beautiful, and wise. Their knowledge was vast. Their cities glimmered with invention. They tamed the sea with canals, carved mountains into gardens, and harnessed the gifts of the earth with quiet mastery. To the gods, they built shrines. To their children, they built a future of wonder. Yet, even in their perfection, there was a whisper, a faint tremor beneath the calm. For power, like the tide, always hungers to rise. The Atlanteans, once guided by divine law, began to listen, instead, to the call of desire. Their palaces grew taller, their armies stronger, and their hearts a little colder with each passing year. Plato wrote not with anger, but with sorrow. He had seen such stories before. Athens itself, once humble, had faced its own temptation of pride. Perhaps that was why he told the tale at all. Not to warn others of an island long lost, but of the same storm that brews in every age. In the dialogue, his words wove philosophy into myth. Atlantis became the mirror through which he spoke of justice, of the fragile bond between man and virtue. A society, he said, thrives only while it remembers the divine order, the harmony between wisdom, courage, and moderation. Lose that balance, and even the mightiest island will sink beneath its own weight. And so, as Plato's ink darkened the wax once more, the waves began to rise. The sky trembled. The gods, silent too long, stirred in judgment. Zeus, in his hidden court, spoke of measure and consequence. of a world brought low by its own excess. Still, there was beauty even in the fall. In his mind's eye, Plato saw the last dawn over Atlantis, the priests in their white robes, the seabirds circling the golden domes, the trembling of the earth beneath sacred feet. And as the ocean claimed its due, the city's lights faded, one by one, like stars slipping beneath the horizon. But the story did not end there. It could not. For in every ending, he saw the seed of remembrance. Somewhere across the centuries, the name would be spoken again, Atlantis, and in that single word, wonder would return. Plato closed his eyes, listening to the silence that followed. It was the same silence that fills the ocean's depths, vast and patient, holding both ruin and promise. And he knew that though the island had fallen, its spirit would never drown. It would drift forever, through stories, through dreams, through the quiet hearts of those who still search for what was lost beneath the waves. Morning crept through the columns of Plato's home, soft and golden, like a promise that the night's thoughts had not been in vain. The scroll lay open before him, its edges curled by the heat of the lamp. He read what he had written, and for a moment it felt less like invention and more like memory. Atlantis had never existed, and yet it did. Not in stone or sea, but in the spaces between human longing. In every soul that dreams of perfection, that yearns for a world unmarred by greed or decay. The island still breathes. He had told the tale through Cratias and Timaeus, not as a map of the world, but as a map of the spirit. For what is Atlantis, if not the story of humanity itself, rising from grace, reaching too far, and sinking beneath the weight of its own brilliance? As he wrote, Plato thought of students who would come long after, men and women who would wonder if the tale was truth. Some would search the oceans, others the stars. Yet he knew the truth of Atlantis did not rest beneath the waves, but within the human heart. He imagined the future generations tracing his words, scholars debating their meaning, explorers chasing horizons that vanished like mist. And through it all, the legend would endure, reshaped and reborn, each age finding its own reflection in its waters. Perhaps that was its purpose. For myths, he mused, do not need to be true to matter. They live because we need them, as lighthouses in the fog, guiding us toward what we once were, or what we might become. He saw in Atlantis the eternal lesson of measure, that wisdom cannot survive without humility, and that even the brightest light casts a shadow when it forgets the source of its glow. The gods in his tale were not cruel. They were mirrors of balance. To restore order, they did not destroy. They reminded. And so the waves became both punishment and purification, a cleansing that the memory of perfection might one day rise again, not in pride, but in peace. Plato set down his stylus and gazed toward the sea. The horizon shimmered faintly, as though the morning itself held the memory of that lost shore. He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and whispered to the air, "Perhaps you still wait out there." Outside, Athens stirred awake. The cries of merchants, the clatter of sandals, the hum of a living city filled the air. Yet, within that noise, his words lingered like a secret carried by time. Carried by hope, Atlantis, he thought, was never meant to be found. It was meant to be remembered. For so long as we tell its story, it still exists. The candle finally died, its smoke curling upward like a spirit taking flight. Plato rose, walking slowly toward the light spilling through the open doorway. Beyond it lay the world flawed, striving, beautiful in its imperfection. And in the quiet of that morning, beneath the endless sky, he knew that somewhere between truth and myth, the island still glimmered, waiting patient as the sea, for dreamers to come again. Before the first storm, before memory itself began to fade, there was light. It shimmered across the surface of a vast ocean, touching towers of white stone and streets that gleamed like polished pearl. This was Atlantis, the island that dreamed of eternity. The air was soft with the scent of salt and flowers, carried by the sea winds that wound through marble arches and golden bridges. Canals, clear as glass, wove through the heart of the city, reflecting the sunlight like veins of living crystal. Temples crowned the hills, rising high above the harbor. Their domes were covered in orichalcum, a metal said to glow with its own inner fire. When dawn came, it turned the whole island to flame, and the sea blushed with its reflection. At the center stood the grand palace, a labyrinth of courts, fountains, and gardens, where kings walked beside philosophers. Statues of gods watched over them, their eyes carved so finely they almost seemed alive. And when the wind moved through the corridors, it sounded like voices whispering from another world. The people of Atlantis were proud, yet they were gentle too for once. They loved the sea as they loved themselves, both mirror and mystery, always close, always vast. Children would play at the edge of the water, watching ships return from distant shores laden with spice, silk, and song music filled the streets. Not the wild cries of war, but soft flutes and chimes that echoed from balcony to balcony. At night, the stars above seemed to mirror the lights below, as though heaven itself leaned close to listen. There were stories told of Poseidon's touch, of how the god had shaped the island with his trident, circling it 7 times, with walls and rings of water. And in the heart of those rings stood his temple, where a single column of blue stone held the promise of the sea. Within that temple, it was said, burned an eternal flame, never dimmed by wind or rain. Lovers would come to make offerings there, praying for protection, for calm waters, for their hearts to remain as steady as the tides. The Atlanteans believed themselves chosen, not by blood, but by brilliance. Their cities hummed with invention. Their ships could cross oceans no other dared to sail. They charted the stars, tamed the waves, built machines that whispered and breathed. But even in paradise, shadows grow. And beneath the marble courtyards and the laughter of children, the sea waited, quiet, patient, remembering the promise it once made to the gods. Atlantis was not built to last forever. Perhaps even the people knew that deep down. For every evening, as the sun dipped low They would gather by the shore, watching the horizon burn to gold, and then to silence. There, standing at the edge of the world, they would speak of dreams, of journeys beyond the waves of immortality, of leaving their mark before the ocean took it all away. In those moments, the island seemed almost human, beautiful, fragile, uncertain of its own perfection. It was not only a city of stone, it was a heartbeat, suspended between pride and peace. And as the night came again, lanterns flickered along the harbors. Their light drifted across the water like tiny souls carried by the wind, drifting toward whatever waited beyond the horizon. For now, Atlantis slept. Its towers glowed softly under the stars, and the sea whispered against its shores, a lullaby, ancient and endless. But somewhere deep beneath the calm, something stirred, a tremor, a warning. The gods were listening. Morning in Atlantis was unlike any other place beneath the sun. The sky opened in soft gold, and the air shimmered with the scent of salt and fruit. Fishermen cast their nets from marble docks, their songs rising with the gulls. The sea, calm and endless, reflected the city's glow as though reluctant to let it go. Beneath that gentle light, markets awoke. Stalls of woven linen fluttered in the breeze. Merchants called softly, not shouting, but singing their wares in lilting tones that blended with the hum of fountains. There were figs, dates, and pearls, laid in bowls of bronze and silver. Children ran between pillars, chasing one another through shafts of sunlight. Priests walked past them, carrying bowls of oil for the morning offerings. In the great square, a bronze statue of Poseidon stood guard, his trident raised toward the sea, as if commanding it to be still. The Atlanteans believed every day was a dialogue with the divine. The waves spoke, the clouds answered, and life was simply the echo between. They built shrines to honor the balance, land and sea, man and God, pride and peace. But even harmony grows heavy with time. The perfection they lived within began to feel fragile, a beauty too exact, too complete. Beneath the shining order, restlessness stirred, a quiet ache that no amount of splendor could soothe. In the palace halls, debates echoed like soft thunder. Should they conquer? Should they remain? The kings and priests spoke of destiny, of dominion promised by the gods. If the sea belongs to us, they said, then surely the world beyond it does. Too, so they built ships, vast and glittering, carved with wings and eyes, and sent them outward, toward lands that trembled at the name Atlantis. At first, their reach was graceful, their rule fair, but with each victory came a thirst, and with each conquest a shadow. Some whispered that the gods grew silent. The sacred flame within the temple flickered low. Dreams grew strange, full of water and ruin, of towers falling into waves. The high priests prayed, but the sea's voice had changed. It no longer whispered, it warned. Still, life went on. Lovers met beneath the arches. Dancers twirled upon polished stone, and children laughed by the harbor. It was as though they could not believe their world might end, as though beauty itself could never break. Yet far beyond the horizon, clouds were gathering, not of rain, but of reckoning. The ocean, that once gentle mirror, had begun to move with unseen purpose. The tides deepened. The seabirds flew farther each day. In the evenings, the people began to sense it. Their songs grew quieter, their prayers longer. A faint unease crept through the marble corridors like mist. They could not name it, yet it lingered an unspoken truth pressing against their hearts. And in that silence, the island seemed to listen too. The wind grew heavy. The waters deepened. The earth beneath their feet shifted, as if remembering something it had tried to forget. For Atlantis, glorious and proud, had risen from the sea by the will of gods, and what is given by the sea must someday return to it. That night, when the moon rose full and pale, the waves glimmered with light, not from the stars, but from the deep below. The water seemed alive, restless, aware. A fisherman on the shore watched the horizon tremble. He dropped his net. He listened. Somewhere beneath the calm, he heard it, a sound like stone cracking, slow and endless. The ocean had begun to speak again, and this time, it would not be gentle. The morning after the trembling sea, the sky above Atlantis hung gray and waiting. The usual shimmer of dawn was gone. No songs rose from the harbor, no laughter from the markets. Even the fountains seemed quieter, their ripples uneasy, as if they too could sense what was coming. Deep beneath the marble streets, the ground sighed. It was a long, low groan that traveled through stone and bone alike, felt more than heard. Birds lifted from the rooftops in sudden bursts, their wings catching the wind like desperate prayers in the palace. The high priest knelt before the altar of Poseidon. The flame that once burned steady now sputtered blue, then dimmed. He whispered ancient words, the same ones spoken when the island first rose from the sea. But this time, the gods did not answer. Along the coast, the water began to pull away, far beyond the shore. Fishermen stared as the ocean retreated, leaving writhing fish upon bare sand. Some stepped forward, confused. Others turned to run, but before they could flee, a sound split the air, a roar that was not thunder, but the sea itself returning. The first wave struck like a wall of glass. It shattered boats, tore through stone piers, and climbed the steps of the harbor like a living creature. The cry of Atlantis rose with it, voices of fear, of disbelief, of helpless awe. Within moments, the lower city was gone. The grand canals that once reflected the sky now became rivers of ruin. Marble bridges cracked and fell. The statues of gods, proud and cold, slipped beneath the churning foam. Still, the palace stood. Its golden domes glimmered defiantly through the storm, as though refusing to fall. Inside, the royal family gathered, drenched in the flickering light of torches. The king looked toward the open sea, and for a heartbeat, he smiled. Perhaps, he whispered, we were never meant to last. Outside, lightning tore across the clouds, illuminating the city in flashes of white fire. Temples crumbled. Towers leaned and sank. The streets became rivers, then oceans. Every echo of laughter, every story, every dream drowned beneath the weight of their own perfection. But even in that ruin, there was grace. Some said the music never stopped, that as the waves rose higher, they carried with them the hum of Atlantean harps, the prayers of children, the final breath of beauty itself. And then, all was silence. The sea calmed, heavy and endless once more. The moonlight returned, laying silver paths across the quiet surface where a kingdom had stood. No ruin remained, no trace of marble or gold, only the faint shimmer of something lost. For centuries after, sailors swore that on still nights, when the tide was low and the stars kind, they could see shapes beneath the water, pillars, steps, statues reaching upward. And if one listened closely enough, they could almost hear it, the echo of a song carried by the deep. Atlantis had not vanished entirely. It had only gone home. And beneath those waves, where sunlight fades and silence reigns, its story waited, not forgotten, merely sleeping. For some tales are too beautiful to die. They sink instead and dream. Before the waves claimed the island, before the temples fell silent, Atlantis had been alive, not merely as stone and water, but as a people. They were said to be radiant, their eyes bright with understanding, their hands skilled in art and invention, children of Poseidon, born between sea and sky. They carried the calm of the ocean in their speech and the fire of creation in their hearts. In the city's highest ring lived the philosophers, thinkers, whose words guided the rhythm of life. They spoke of harmony, balance, and the duty of wisdom. Yet even they could not see how easily harmony can tilt into pride. Below them were the artisans, the sculptors who shaped marble into breath, the engineers who coaxed water into song through canals and fountains. They did not merely build, they composed. Each building, each bridge, was a verse in a poem that the city sang every day. At dawn, merchants opened their stalls, filling the air with the scent of myrrh, salt, and roasted grain. Children chased birds through the squares, their laughter echoing between columns of white stone. There was music everywhere, flutes, lyres, voices raised in joy. To walk through Atlantis was to walk through a dream that had learned to breathe. The streets shimmered with polished stone, canals reflected towers of gold, and the sea itself seemed to bow at the island's edge. The people believed they were favored, that the gods had chosen them, alone to carry the torch of beauty and truth. They built temples not to ask for blessings, but to thank the heavens for what they already possessed. But gratitude has a fragile life. It begins as reverence and too often ends as pride. Soon, whispers began, quiet doubts, spoken in the marble shadows. Some wondered if they still needed the gods at all. The rulers encouraged this silence. "We are the gods now," one was rumored to have said. "We have mastered the seas, the stars, and the soul. What more is there to fear?" In those days, Atlantis gleamed brighter than any realm before or after. Its healers cured illness with herbs unknown to other lands. Its astronomers charted the heavens with such precision that even the priests of Egypt sought their counsel. But with every discovery came arrogance. With every new marvel, their humility eroded like the cliffs beneath their shining walls. And yet, among them were still the pure, those who sought not glory, but understanding. They watched the change in silence, hearts heavy with a dread they could not name. One philosopher, old and nearly blind, stood before the council and spoke softly. When men forget the ocean that birthed them, the sea will remind them. Laughter filled the hall. His words became a jest, a phrase repeated in mockery at feasts. But he did not laugh. He had seen what came to those who thought themselves above the tide. Still, life continued. The festivals grew grander, the palaces higher. Songs of victory replaced hymns of devotion. The people toasted to progress and called it peace in the heart of the city. A young sculptor carved the likeness of a god, not Poseidon, but man himself. The statue's gaze was proud, its hand raised as though commanding the sea. When it was unveiled, the crowd cheered. No one noticed the small tremor beneath their feet. Atlantis shone brightest in those final days. Its people walked with confidence, their footsteps echoing through streets that had forgotten prayer. But somewhere, deep below the surface, something ancient stirred, waiting to be remembered. The tremors came softly at first, like the heartbeat of the earth. Most dismissed them, the shifting of tides, the grumble of the sea beneath their shining city. But a few began to listen. The farmers noticed the wells tasting faintly of salt. Fishermen found their nets tangled with strange seaweed, glowing faintly under moonlight. The philosophers debated these omens, calling them curiosities, not warnings. Still, the old man, who once spoke of the ocean's memory, began to pray again. Yet the people were not afraid. They trusted their brilliance more than they trusted the gods. The sea bends to us, they said, watching ships sail through canals of their own making. We have tamed it. In the great amphitheater, plays were performed about their triumphs, heroes who conquered storms, lovers who whispered to the waves. The stories were beautiful, filled with music and laughter. But beneath the applause was a shadow that no one wanted to name. The children of Atlantis were raised to believe they were perfection itself. They were taught the stars moved for them, that their blood carried divinity. And when pride is born so early, it no longer feels like sin. It feels like truth. Among the nobles, competition became a quiet war. Who could build the tallest tower, the most lavish temple, the grandest hall? Each victory was met with celebration, but also envy. In marble corridors, smiles hid sharpened thoughts, and still the tremors grew stronger. Birds began to leave the island, flying inland as if guided by an unseen hand. The priests read the omens and saw disaster, but when they spoke, they were silenced. The queen of Atlantis, a woman said to have the voice of the sea itself, began to dream of water rising over her golden palace. She told her advisors, but they only bowed and said, "Dreams cannot touch the wise." So the feasts continued. Lanterns floated upon the canals like fallen stars. Dancers wove between the pillars, their shadows moving like waves across stone. It was beautiful, too beautiful, the kind of beauty that always comes before the end. a young sailor, restless and strange, began writing a journal of what he saw, the signs in the sea, the strange pull of the tide. "It feels alive," he wrote, "as if it remembers." His words would never be found. Soon, the scholars noticed the stars were changing. Their constellations no longer aligned with the heavens. It was as if the sky itself had turned its gaze away. And then, one morning, the sea fell silent. No gulls, no wind, no sound but the faint hum of the earth below. The people awoke, uneasy. Even the fountains did not sing that day. The queen walked to the edge of her balcony and looked upon her city, the shining rings of marble, the gold-tipped temples, the endless canals that had made Atlantis a miracle. And for the first time, she felt fear. She whispered, "Perhaps the gods have returned to claim what was theirs." In that moment, far beyond the horizon, the ocean began to rise, not as a wave, but as a whisper, slow, patient, certain. The people of Atlantis would look up from their markets, their gardens, their tables, and see the sea itself moving toward them, as though it remembered their names. They had mastered the world, but forgotten the one lesson all creation must learn. Nothing made by pride survives forever. The sculptor who once carved the statue of man stood before his creation as the floor trembled. The cracks reached its feet first, then its heart, then its perfect human face. And in that final instant, the city of the wise began to understand what wisdom truly meant. The air grew heavy, thick with salt and silence. Even the light seemed slower, as though the sun itself hesitated to shine upon what was coming. Across the marble courtyards, people gathered not in joy, but in confusion. They felt it in their bones, though they could not name it. The priests climbed the temple steps, carrying offerings of gold and incense. Smoke curled into the still air, but no wind came to carry their prayers. "The gods have turned away," one whispered. Another answered, "No, they are watching," unaware that they were walking through a memory already fading. The sea, once a friend, now waited beyond the horizon, like a patient judge. Ships anchored at the harbors began to strain against their moorings. Waves rose and fell without rhythm. The sailors looked to the horizon and saw nothing, yet felt everything. That night, the stars disappeared. A veil of mist rolled over the island, thick and luminous, swallowing the sky. The people lit torches, but even fire felt weak, its flame bending low as if afraid to burn. In the queen's palace, the sound of cracking stone echoed through the halls. Servants dropped their trays, listening to the walls breathe. The queen stood at her window, watching the reflection of lightning far out at sea. She remembered the stories her mother once told of gods who loved too deeply and destroyed what they could not bear to lose. "Perhaps we were loved too much," she murmured. Beneath the city, the great machines of Atlantis, those engines of silver and light, began to hum uncontrollably. The very inventions that had lifted them above the world now trembled against their own power. The scholars ran to silence them, but the gears would not obey. And then came the first roar, a sound not of thunder, but of the sea itself breaking free. The ground shuddered. Statues fell. Bridges cracked. Fountains burst into wild columns of water. Children cried out for their parents. And the elders prayed to gods whose names had long been forgotten. In the grand amphitheater, where once music had filled the air, a single note rang from a broken instrument, soft, mournful, endless. It was as if the city itself was singing its own farewell. The queen fled to the temple of Poseidon, her robes torn by falling stone. If this is punishment, she whispered, let it be swift. But the gods do not answer prayers made too late. From the sea's edge, a wall of water rose higher than any tower of man. The sailors fell to their knees. The last light of the sun struck the crest of that great wave, turning it gold, a cruel reflection of Atlantis itself. And then silence broke. The sea fell upon the city with the weight of heaven. Temples crumbled like sandcastles. The golden domes of kings were swallowed in an instant. The mighty canals that once gave life now became rivers of death. The queen's final breath was spent in awe, not terror, for even in destruction. Atlantis was beautiful. When the waters receded, there was nothing left but ripples and a whisper beneath the waves. Centuries would pass. The sea would calm. The earth would forget. But sometimes, in moments of stillness, sailors swore they could hear faint music beneath the surface, the echo of a lost city dreaming of light. And perhaps the people of Atlantis still walked there in silence, their footsteps carried by the currents, their memories woven into coral and stone. Maybe they are not gone at all, merely waiting, for the sea remembers everything. It began, as all endings do, with a whisper. The skies above Atlantis grew dim, though no storm had yet arrived. The air itself seemed to hesitate, heavy with a silence that pressed upon the soul. The birds stopped singing. The fountains stilled. Even the sea, that eternal friend, watched from afar, waiting. The people did not understand, not yet. But the priests knew. They had seen the signs in their dreams. Stars trembling, fires that refused to light, water that flowed backward in sacred pools. They gathered before the great statue of Poseidon, their faces pale with knowing. The gods are restless. One murmured, "We have gone too far." For in their pride, the Atlanteans had become mirrors of the gods themselves. They commanded the sea with machines of light, carved the sky with towers of stone, and bent the elements to their will. They believed themselves chosen, eternal, untouchable. But divinity does not share its throne. The first tremor came at dusk. It was gentle, like the earth sighing beneath their feet. A few stones fell. Children laughed, thinking it a game. But deep within the city, something ancient began to stir. Something buried beneath the marble foundations. Older than Atlantis itself. The next day, the temples cracked. Water seeped through the ground in thin, silver streams. Crops wilted without reason. The priests lit candles that would not burn. In the royal court, the scholars gathered before the queen. Their charts and instruments shook in their hands. "The tides have changed," one whispered. "The moon no longer follows her path. The queen looked out from her balcony toward the horizon where the sun bled red across the sea. "Then the gods have turned away," she said quietly at night. The dreams came. Men saw fire raining from the heavens. Women heard the sea calling their names in voices, both beautiful and cruel. The priests awoke in terror, their hearts heavy with visions of mountains falling and cities drowned. They climbed once more to the temple of Poseidon to offer prayers and tears. But when they looked upon the statue, they saw that its eyes had darkened, the sapphire inlays gone dull, as though the god himself had looked away. And so the panic began. Citizens fled to the ports, their ships crowding the harbors. Families clutched what little they could carry: gold, relics, pieces of home. The great scholars argued in the squares, trying to name the disaster before it arrived. Some said it was the will of the gods. Others whispered of a weapon gone wrong, one of Atlantis' own inventions, now rebelling against its masters. But whatever the truth, the air carried the same scent: salt, smoke, and fear. The ground trembled again. Statues fell from their pedestals. The great crystal spire of the Hall of Wisdom shattered, sending shards of light into the streets below. Still, the queen refused to leave. "This is our home," she said softly. "If the gods have judged us, then we will meet their gaze." On the third day, the sea began to rise, not as a tide, but as a slow, deliberate wall. It pressed against the shores, inch by inch, as though testing the land. The sailors who remained watched with hollow eyes. One dropped to his knees, pressing his hand into the sand. "Forgive us," he whispered to the waves. "Forgive what we've forgotten." For the Atlanteans had once been pure builders, dreamers, keepers of balance. But power had twisted that light, turned reverence into arrogance, and worship into control. The gods had waited long enough. Lightning split the sky, not white, but gold, blinding in its beauty. The temples burned with a strange, silent flame. The earth beneath Atlantis groaned, a deep, echoing sound that seemed to come from the heart of the world. And far above it all, the sea began to glow. It shimmered in the darkness, alive with an unearthly light, the mark of Poseidon's hand. The gods had spoken. Their wrath had begun. The night of fire began without a sound. For a moment, Atlantis hung between worlds, caught in the still breath before creation shatters. The air was thick with ash and memory. The sea shimmered like molten glass, reflecting a sky that had turned the color of dying embers. Then the earth screamed. Mountains split apart. Rivers boiled. The marble streets cracked open like veins of light, spilling molten stone beneath the city's feet. The people ran their footsteps, echoing in temples now empty of gods. In the high temple, the priests chanted in trembling voices, their hymns lost beneath the roar. The great bronze bells rang on their own, swinging wildly as if the heavens themselves were calling for judgment. The queen stood upon the palace balcony, her white robe stained with soot. The wind tore through her hair as she watched the horizon vanish beneath a rising wall of water. "Poseidon," she whispered, "if this is your will, then let it be swift." But the gods were not swift. They were slow, deliberate, as if each moment were carved into eternity. The towers fell one by one. The great bridges snapped like threads of glass. Statues of kings, once proud and eternal, sank into the earth as though swallowed by regret. The people gathered on the temple steps, clutching their children, praying to stars that could no longer be seen. Some wept. Others stared blankly into the smoke-filled sky, too afraid to move. And yet, amid the chaos, there were still whispers of courage. A group of healers refused to flee, tending to the wounded as the ground shook beneath them. Sailors guided strangers onto the last surviving ships, their eyes hollow but steady. The queen herself took a child's hand, leading her through the falling ash toward the cliffs. The sea was rising faster now, its voice no longer gentle, but furious, ancient, and alive. Waves struck the walls of the city, breaking through the gates in torrents of silver and foam. The people screamed. The ships capsized. The spires collapsed. Still, the queen did not look away. "Remember us," she said to the wind. "Let our story not be lost." And as if in answer, the sea rose higher, a single, towering wave, reaching for the heavens. It hung there for an impossible moment, suspended between rage and mercy, then fell. The city vanished beneath it. The flames died in an instant, drowned beneath the crushing weight of water and silt. Temples, palaces, markets, all swallowed whole. The last sound was the breaking of air, like 1,000 sighs fading into silence. When the sea grew calm again, nothing remained. Only bubbles rose from the deep, glimmering faintly in the moonlight. Far above, clouds parted and the stars returned cold, distant, watching. The gods had done what they must. Pride had been punished, balance restored, but beneath the waves, Atlantis did not sleep. Its towers stood silent, preserved in shadow. Statues stared upward through veils of coral and sand. Gardens swayed in ghostly rhythm with the tides. And sometimes, when the world above grew quiet, the sea would murmur softly. As if remembering, it spoke of a city that once glowed brighter than the sun, of people who dreamed too high, of love that defied the gods. And though the surface had forgotten, the ocean never did. For every wave carries its memory. Every current hums its song. And somewhere, in the deep heart of the sea, Atlantis still breathes. When the storm had passed, the sea lay still. No cries, no fire, no sound, only the soft rhythm of waves whispering to the ashes below. The world had returned to silence, as though the gods themselves were weary from what they had done. Above the water, dawn broke, pale and uncertain. The horizon was empty, where once towers had pierced the clouds. Birds circled aimlessly, finding no land to rest upon. The air was heavy with salt and sorrow. Beneath the surface, a different world had begun. The marble courtyards of Atlantis now lay in twilight, columns bent, statues veiled in seaweed. Light filtered through the water in golden ribbons, touching faces carved from forgotten stone. Fishes swam through doorways where kings once walked. Coral crept over thrones that had ruled empires. The great libraries were gone. Scrolls that once held the wisdom of centuries, dissolved like petals in the current. Yet, some believed the words remained written not in ink, but in memory, drifting in the deep like prayer. And in that deep silence, the gods, too, were quiet. Poseidon's trident rested at the ocean floor, its glow fading. The storm he had summoned had done more than punish. It had cleansed, renewed, balanced. The pride of mortals had met the patience of eternity, and eternity had prevailed. But not all was loss. From the waves rose new shores, small islands, scattered like fragments of the old world. On one such shore, a single survivor awoke. A priest, perhaps, or a dreamer. His body trembled, his heart unbroken. He looked to the horizon and whispered, "We are not gone." And so began the story's echo, told and retold across ages. Sailors would later speak of ghostly lights beneath the waves, of music in the deep of towers glimpsed by moonlight before vanishing again. Scholars would argue, skeptics would deny, poets would dream, but the memory endured. For Atlantis was no longer just a place. It had become a mirror, a reflection of humanity's reach, its brilliance, its arrogance, its longing to touch the divine. And in that reflection, we saw both our glory and our fall. Some say the gods watched and wept. Others say they smiled. For even destruction births creation, and even loss becomes legend. Centuries passed, seas shifted, empires rose and crumbled. Still, the sea guarded its secret. Divers searched, prophets claimed visions, empires promised discovery. But the truth remained where it began, deep, patient, unbending. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, when the waves are gentle and the wind stands still, the ocean hums a low, ancient song. Those who listen closely say it sounds like a heartbeat, faint, steady, alive. It is said that when the stars align and the sea glows silver, you can see her, the queen of Atlantis, walking among the ruins. Her gown flowing like water, her eyes reflecting the world that was lost. She does not speak. She only watches, for hers is the memory that will never fade. And as the tides rise and fall, her voice drifts with them, soft, unbroken. We lived, we loved, we dreamed too high, and still we are remembered. Then, silence again, the eternal kind. The sea folds her stories gently, hiding them among coral and light. The waves retreat, the stars remain, and the world above carries on, unaware of the kingdom sleeping beneath, but somewhere deep in the endless blue. Atlantis waits not as ruin, but as a promise, a reminder that nothing truly vanishes, not cities, not love, not dreams, only transformed, carried forward, whispered from the depths. And in that whisper, the gods still listen. Long after the waves swallowed Atlantis, the story refused to die. It drifted through centuries like a dream that refused to fade, passed from sailor to scholar, from mystic to mapmaker. Each one claimed to have heard its echo. Somewhere beyond the horizon, in the age of exploration, whispers of the lost island stirred once more. Men traced coastlines, charted seas, and watched the stars for signs. And sometimes, when the ocean mist shimmered beneath the moon, they swore they saw something, spires, faint and gleaming, before sinking again into the deep. Perhaps it was imagination, or perhaps memory remembering itself. In ancient scrolls, philosophers debated its truth. Plato had told the tale of a vast island empire, rich in wisdom and beauty, punished for pride and greed. But was he recording history or warning humanity? The question lingered like a tide that never recedes. The first explorers sought proof, chasing maps that led to nowhere. They believed that if they could find Atlantis, they could reclaim the wisdom of the gods. Yet, with every voyage, the sea only deepened its silence. Still, hope endured. It always does. From the deserts of Egypt to the cliffs of Santorini, voices rose, claiming, here it was. Scholars compared ruins, patterns, and stars, searching for alignment between myth and earth in the ruins of Thera. They found ash and memory, the remnants of a city destroyed by fire and sea. Could it have been Atlantis, reborn under another name? In the waters near Spain, divers spoke of strange walls beneath the sand, geometric, deliberate. Others swore by the Caribbean's shimmering shallows, where roads of coral ran straight as human design. The world began to look backward, yearning to rediscover what it had lost. And perhaps that longing was Atlantis's truest legacy. Even the ancients were haunted by it. Egyptians told of a first time, when gods ruled and islands fell. The Minoans carved spirals that mirrored ocean currents. The Sumerians wrote of floods that cleansed the world. Every tale, every ruin, seemed to hum the same rhythm of rise, of fall, of forgetting and remembering again. Atlantis became a mirror, reflecting humanity's oldest truth, that civilizations, no matter how grand, are but waves in time, each one rising, shining, then fading into another. The Greek philosophers called it a parable. The mystics called it prophecy, and somewhere between those names, the story endured. When Rome fell, monks in candlelit halls copied Plato's dialogues, preserving his words against the silence of the Dark Ages. And through those words, Atlantis kept breathing. Each generation found in it what they needed most: wonder, warning, or hope. In the Renaissance, the tale awakened anew. Painters dreamed of glowing temples under turquoise seas. Poets wrote of lovers lost beneath the waves. Explorers sailed west, their compasses trembling toward the unknown. For them, Atlantis was not a ruin. It was a possibility, the promise that somewhere, untouched by time, perfection had once existed, and maybe could again. And so the story wandered from parchment to ocean, from myth to map by a whisper through the centuries. A dream that refused to drown. It became the heartbeat of the curious, the quiet muse of those who still looked beyond the edge of the world. And though the sea guards her secrets well, there are nights when the tide retreats just far enough that one might almost hear it, the sound of waves brushing ancient stone, the faint hum of forgotten songs, echoes in time. Returning home, the world never stopped searching. From age to age, the face of Atlantis shifted, a phantom in the mist of time. Scholars and sailors alike became dreamers, following whispers that drifted through maps, through myths, through memory itself. Some looked to the pillars of Heracles, the narrow straits we now call Gibraltar. They imagined the island beyond, resting in the Atlantic's deep embrace. The ocean there was vast, endless, and full of secrets. To the Greeks, it was the edge of the known world. Beyond it, they said, lay eternity. Others turned their eyes to the Mediterranean. They found echoes in the Aegean, in Santorini's broken caldera, in Crete's ancient palaces. The ruins of Knossos, with its labyrinth halls and vivid murals, spoke of a civilization advanced, mysterious, too similar to be coincidence. Could the Minoans have been the children of Atlantis? Or were they merely one more empire that rose and fell beneath the gods' gaze? In Egypt, scribes had written of a kingdom swallowed by the sea. In the Americas, temples stood with symbols strangely familiar to those carved in Greece. The stories connected like constellations, scattered, yet bound by invisible lines. And still, the question lingered. Was Atlantis ever real? Or was it memory pretending to be myth? Through the centuries, the idea changed shape, like sand sculpted by wind. To scientists, it became a puzzle. To poets, a metaphor. To believers, a lost home waiting to be rediscovered. In the 19th century, curiosity burned anew. Adventurers with maps and compasses declared that they would find it, that they would prove Plato right. Each discovery, no matter how small, felt like an echo of that ancient promise. In 1882, Ignatius Donnelly wrote Atlantis, the antediluvian world, claiming that all civilizations descended from that one lost island. His words spread like wildfire, stirring imaginations across continents. For the first time, Atlantis was not just a legend, it was a blueprint of forgotten greatness. But for every theory, another rose to challenge it. The sea, indifferent and silent, gave no answers. It only swallowed the footprints of those who searched too far. And yet, people never stopped listening. Even today, machines hum deep beneath the waves, scanning for shapes that memory still swears are there, the outlines of walls, the shadows of temples. Technology may have changed, but the yearning remains the same. Perhaps Atlantis isn't meant to be found in maps or ruins. Perhaps it survives only where imagination meets faith. In the quiet hours, when we wonder where humanity's first dreams began. Because Atlantis is not just a place, it's a question. It asks whether we once touched perfection and lost it. Whether we built too high, reached too far, or simply forgot how to live in harmony with what we had. And as the centuries rolled on, those echoes continued to call. Sailors swore they heard them in the creak of their ships. Philosophers found them in Plato's fading words. Even now, in a world mapped and measured, the mystery lingers, a faint shimmer between truth and legend. Atlantis is the promise that there's always something more, waiting just beyond our understanding. And maybe that's why we can't let it go, because as long as we search, As long as we imagine, Atlantis still lives, not beneath the waves, but within the depths of the human heart. Every age rediscovers it. Every dream rebuilds it, and every whisper of the sea seems to say, keep searching, because somewhere, just beyond the horizon, the lost island still breathes in silence. Its light, not gone, only hidden, waiting for someone to remember. In the quiet corners of museums, the dream still lingers, between the glass cases and the labels of the forgotten. Fragments of ancient worlds rest, shards of pottery, pieces of maps, the faint scratches of lost language. To some, they are relics. To others, clues. Each fragment feels like it remembers something we do not. A whisper of a coast, a trace of a people who once built beyond what they needed, who aimed for beauty. Before survival, Atlantis has always been more than a place. It is a mirror. When philosophers spoke of it, they spoke of ourselves, of the cities we build, and how easily we let them fall. It is said that great civilizations do not die in flame or flood, but in silence. When memory turns to myth, and the lessons are buried beneath the noise of progress. Perhaps that is the truest meaning of Atlantis. Not a city lost to water, but wisdom lost to time. Each generation retells the story, bending it to fit its fears and hopes. To the ancients, Atlantis was a warning. To dreamers, it became paradise. To the weary, it is a promise that what was lost might still be found. And so, explorers still dive into the deep, guided not by compass, but by longing. They search where sunlight fades, where even sound forgets its way. Down there, among the silent plains of the sea floor, imagination stirs. Every mound of sand could be a temple. Every stone, a threshold. Every glimmer of light, a memory returning home. But maybe Atlantis doesn't want to be found. Maybe its story survives because it remains just out of reach, forever calling us toward wonder. In that distance lies its magic. In the ache of not knowing, we find the pulse of curiosity that keeps our species awake. For what are we, if not wanderers of the unseen? We chase what vanishes. We name what disappears. And we dream of the world before it forgot us. There are those who say Atlantis lies not under water, but under centuries of forgetting, buried beneath dust and disbelief. Yet, sometimes, when the ocean is calm and the moon bends low, you can almost feel it, a city breathing beneath the waves, slow and eternal. The marble still stands in those dreams. The canals still glisten. The people still walk in silence, their footsteps echoing through water and time. Perhaps they remember us too, wondering if we ever learned the lesson their fall left behind. That beauty without balance brings ruin. That wisdom without humility becomes blindness. That the sea always reclaims what pride builds too high. Atlantis is both the question and the answer. It is what happens when brilliance forgets to be kind, when greatness forgets to be grateful. And so, its myth endures, not as a tragedy, but as a lullaby, a soft song from the depths, reminding us of what it means to begin again, because maybe Atlantis never truly sank. Maybe it transformed, not into ruin, but into reflection. Every time a civilization rises, every time one falls, a piece of that old city stirs. Its voice is carried in the tides, in the winds. In the words we still tell, it whispers to the hearts that listen. Build, but remember. Dream, but stay humble. Rise, but never forget the sea. And so, the legend continues. Endless, eternal. Not a story of what was lost, but of what we must always find again. Long before the word Atlantis was spoken in Plato's halls, ancient civilizations had already carved their memories into stone. From the sands of Egypt to the islands of Crete, stories of floods, gods, and vanished cities had already begun their quiet circulation. Plato's tale may have given Atlantis a name, but the idea, the memory of it, may have been much older. Imagine the old world, when priests gazed at the stars and saw not distant fires, but messages from the divine. To them, history wasn't just what happened. It was what returned. Empires rose and fell, like the breath of the cosmos. And somewhere between those breaths, a city disappeared beneath the sea. The Egyptians spoke of Septepe the first time, an age before memory, when gods walked beside men and the world was pure. The Sumerians told of Eridu and its 7 sages, who rose from the waters to teach humankind wisdom and order, and the Minoans, whose palaces glimmered on the island of Crete, lived with the rhythm of the sea itself, until one day, that sea turned against them. Each of these civilizations carried echoes of Atlantis within them, not in name, but in spirit. The Nile, the Euphrates, the Aegean, each was a mirror of paradise and destruction. Floods nourished and drowned, gods blessed and punished, and through it all, humankind remembered in stories, in myths, in monuments that refused to crumble. Some scholars believe Plato's inspiration may have come from Egypt. He wrote that Solon, the wise Athenian lawgiver, had heard the story from Egyptian priests, men who kept records far older than Greece itself. In their scrolls, perhaps, lay a warning of a great island that defied the heavens and was swallowed by the sea. Others point to the Minoans, whose city of Thera, now Santorini, perished in fire and ash. A volcanic cataclysm, violent and sudden, turned day into night and carved a wound in the Aegean that still bleeds beauty. They were advanced, artistic, peaceful, much like Plato's Atlanteans, and their fall might have burned itself into cultural memory, waiting for a philosopher's pen to give it form. But deeper still, beneath even history's surface, lies something older, a shared remembrance, as if humanity itself once stood together, watching the horizon vanish under the sea. Every culture tells of floods. Every people remembers a before and an after. Maybe Atlantis isn't just Greece's myth. Maybe it's everyone's. For in the hearts of the ancients, water was both cradle and grave. It birthed the world, and it would end it. And in between, civilizations clung to its edge, building temples to honor what they could never truly control. Even the pyramids, pointing skyward, seemed to echo the lost peaks of Atlantis, monuments of defiance against decay. Stone became memory. Memory became myth. And myth became the only way to survive forgetting. So when Plato wrote of Atlantis, He wasn't inventing a fantasy. He was remembering something the world had already lost, a golden age that ended not once, but again and again, each time civilization reached too high. For all our progress, the ancients remind us, we have been here before. We have built, and we have fallen. We have reached for the divine, and drowned in our own reflection. Atlantis is not a story of a single place. It is the pulse of human history itself, a rhythm of creation, destruction, and rebirth. And perhaps that is why the legend never dies. Because as long as the sea still moves, as long as the earth still remembers, the story must be told again. The ancients, in their wisdom, did not see myths as falsehoods. They saw them as vessels, carrying truths too vast for reason alone. Each legend, each tale of flood or fire, was a way to speak to eternity, to remind humankind of what once was, and what might be again, across the lands of Mesopotamia. The story of Utnapishtim echoed through clay tablets, the man who survived a divine flood and preserved life upon the waters. He lived long before Noah, before Moses, before written memory itself. And in his story, too, the world began anew, washed clean of pride and sin. How different was that from Atlantis, really? A people blessed by the gods, corrupted by arrogance, and drowned beneath the waves. Perhaps these are not separate tales, but many voices whispering the same ancient warning. The Egyptians, too, spoke of balance, manat, the harmony that sustained heaven and earth. When balance was lost, chaos returned, and the Nile would rise not as a giver, but as a destroyer. To live was to honor the order of the cosmos, and to forget was to sink beneath its tide. Even in faraway India, stories of Devrak, a city of gods swallowed by the sea, rippled through sacred texts. They tell of shining towers, divine warriors, and a cataclysm that erased a kingdom of wonder. Archaeologists have found ruins beneath the Gulf of Qamhet, where some believe those stories might have begun. It seems that wherever humans lived, they dreamed of a paradise lost. Atlantis, then, was not alone. It was a chapter in a far older book, written in flood and fire, read in myth and memory, the Minoans of Crete, flourishing around 1600 BCE, may have been one of those chapters. Their palaces shimmered with color filled with frescoes of dolphins, lilies, and dancers moving in the light of the sun. They worshipped the sea, not as master, but as mother. And when the volcano on Thera erupted, the mother claimed her children back. Some say the eruption inspired Plato's tale directly, that the philosopher's imagination built Atlantis upon the ruins of a very real civilization. If so, the legend is not fantasy, but a memory reborn through words. But there is something deeper in these connections, something that feels almost intentional, as though humankind cannot stop telling the same story of greatness, of fall, of remembrance. Every age, every empire, every heart carries its own Atlantis. And so the question is not whether Atlantis existed. It is why we need it too. For the ancients, Atlantis was not only a warning, it was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when humanity forgets its place among the divine. when pride outweighs harmony, when abundance blinds us to wisdom. Perhaps that's why so many temples faced the sea, as if to watch, to remember, to promise, never to repeat. But time forgets, and water remembers. Look closely at the ruins of Thebes, of Eurynaces. The stones whisper not of death, but of return. Civilizations fall, yet their spirits drift through time, reshaping themselves into new worlds, new myths, new Atlanteans. We are the descendants of those who dreamed and drowned, and through their stories, they live again. Maybe that's what Plato truly understood, that Atlantis was not meant to be found, but felt. It is not a city lost in the sea, but a truth hidden within the soul. For what is civilization but a fragile island of light, surrounded by the deep? And what is myth but the memory of that light, still burning beneath the waves? The ancients looked to the heavens, not only for gods, but for memory. Each constellation, each movement of the stars, carried echoes of lost worlds. They believed that what was destroyed on earth could be reborn in the sky, that Atlantis too might rise among the constellations. Plato's students would later ask if Atlantis was history or allegory. But to those who came after, the mystics, the dreamers, the seekers, it was neither. It was revelation, a map of the human condition, drawn across eternity. The Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time, a golden age before the flood, when gods walked among men. The Mayans told of ages that ended in fire, then water, then silence, and in each age, a chosen few survived. To remember what the others forgot, perhaps Atlantis was one of those forgotten ages, a beacon of wisdom erased to make way for a new dawn. Perhaps it was never lost at all, only transformed, hidden behind the veil of myth until the world was ready to listen again. In Delphi, the oracle whispered that all knowledge is cyclical, that truth, like the sun, sets only to rise once more. And so, the story of Atlantis was told and retold, reshaped through time and tongue, until it became less about a place and more about a promise, the promise that humanity could build again brighter, wiser, more humble before the powers that move the seas. For the Atlanteans, as Plato said, had once been pure of heart. Their power came from their harmony with the world, the rhythm of tides, the balance of the soul. But when desire overtook discipline, when abundance dulled their reverence, the gods withdrew their favor, and the earth reclaimed its peace. Some believe this is not punishment, but mercy. That destruction is the universe's way of giving us a second beginning, a chance to remember what we once forgot. And so, the legend of Atlantis lingers in the silence between waves, in the ruins beneath our feet, in the longing that humankind cannot shake. Because deep within us, we know the truth. Every civilization carries the seed of its own Atlantis. When we grow too proud, the waters rise. When we forget to listen, the ground trembles. But when we remember, truly remember, something ancient stirs within the heart. A whisper of the first cities, of the first dreams, of the first fall. Maybe that's why the ancients built monuments that aligned with the stars. Maybe they were not reaching upward in arrogance, but in remembrance. Each temple, each stone, a message to the future. Do not forget what we became. Do not forget what we lost. Atlantis, then, is not just a legend of the sea. It is a legend of the soul. It reminds us that beauty can be fleeting, wisdom fragile, and truth drowned in desire. But it also reminds us that stories like islands can resurface when the tides turn, and so the ancients kept telling it. Priests in Egypt, philosophers in Greece, poets in Rome, each one added their voice to the chorus, carrying the song of Atlantis into the ages. And tonight, as we listen, in the hush of the dark, we become part of that chorus too. We, the listeners, the dreamers, the keepers of memory. The sea still murmurs, the stars still gleam, and somewhere, far beyond the horizon of knowing, Atlantis breathes again. Long after the seas had swallowed Atlantis, the story remained, passed down in whispers, in half-remembered dreams, in the quiet ache of humanity's longing to understand its own beginning and its own end. Myth, after all, is the language of memory. It is how the ancient world spoke to itself, and how we still listen. Atlantis is not just the tale of a sunken city. It is a mirror held against the soul of man. Plato may have told the story to warn of pride, but his words took on a life beyond his reason, blooming like coral across centuries. Every culture that touched the story changed it, shaped it, breathed new meaning into the ruins. Some saw Atlantis as paradise lost, a world of peace and beauty undone by arrogance. Others saw it as the cradle of all civilization, the source from which wisdom flowed like rivers into Egypt, Greece, and beyond. And some, in darker visions, saw it as punishment, the wrath of gods against the arrogance of man. But maybe Atlantis was never meant to be understood with certainty. Maybe its meaning shifts, like the sea itself, with every age that dreams of it. To the philosopher, Atlantis is a question. What happens when knowledge forgets humility? To the poet, it is a lament, for even the most perfect garden can drown. And to the dreamer, it is a promise that lost worlds can still be remembered, if only through story. Each retelling becomes an echo. Each listener becomes a keeper. And through those echoes, the myth never truly dies. It sleeps waiting, like an island beneath the waves. For those who will listen again, there is a strange tenderness in myths like this, stories that survive even when truth fades. They remind us that history is not only made of stone and ruin, but of memory and hope. Atlantis lives not because it was found, but because it was believed. Some scholars say myths are warnings. Others call them dreams disguised as history. But perhaps they are both. Perhaps myths are the soul's way of remembering what the mind cannot. We tell ourselves stories of creation and destruction, of gods and floods, because deep within, we know these are not just legends. They are patterns, ripples of truth that return again and again, like the tide. Atlantis, then, is not a city lost to time. It is the eternal rhythm of rise and fall, of brilliance, decay, and rebirth. A reflection of everything we are, and everything we may yet become. When Plato's students asked him if Atlantis was real, he only smiled. Perhaps, he said, it is more real than you know. And maybe that is the point. That the story's truth was never meant to be measured in stones or ruins, but in meaning. In every era, Atlantis becomes something new. To the Renaissance, it was a symbol of divine order lost. To the Enlightenment, a mystery for science to solve. And now, to us, it is an echo of warning, a question we still cannot answer. Will our own world to sink beneath the weight of its ambition? The myth endures because it feels familiar, because we have seen its shadow in our own reflections. The glitter of towers, the hum of power, the quiet fear that all we build could one day be taken back by the sea. And so, Atlantis remains, half dream, half memory, a story that refuses to end, a truth too ancient for certainty and too beautiful for silence. In quiet moments, when the world falls still, you can almost hear it, a pulse beneath the waves, a heartbeat echoing from a city that refuses to be forgotten. Some say the myth of Atlantis endures because it speaks to a wound buried deep in the human spirit, the fear of losing what we love, and the longing to rebuild what was lost. Every civilization dreams of perfection, and every civilization fears its end. Atlantis became both a dream of harmony and a warning of hubris. The story tells of wisdom greater than our own, of beauty unmarred by time, and of a pride so great it invited ruin. But perhaps that ruin was not an ending, only a reminder. For even the deepest sea cannot drown an idea. It drifts like a forgotten melody, carried by currents of memory and imagination. And every storyteller who whispers its name pulls it closer to the surface once more. In ancient temples, scholars carved its name into stone. In the libraries of Alexandria, philosophers debated its meaning. In the medieval world, monks copied Plato's words by candlelight, uncertain if they spoke of history or parable, yet even they could not let it fade. Atlantis became a reflection of every age that retold it. For the seekers of the Renaissance, it was a lost paradise. For explorers of the New World, it was proof that golden lands still waited beyond the horizon. For mystics, it was the memory of a divine age, when gods still walked among men. Perhaps what we truly chase is not the city, but the feeling it gives that somewhere perfection once existed and could again, that humanity was once wise, peaceful, whole, and that by finding Atlantis, we might also rediscover that version of ourselves. But memory is not a map. It shifts, reshapes, and deceives. The more we seek Atlantis in the sand and sea, the further it drifts, until we realize the search was never about a place, but a truth. That all empires fall. That wisdom, if left unguarded, can sink beneath waves of greed and forgetfulness. And that sometimes myths are not meant to be solved, but heard. Because Atlantis speaks not only of loss, but of return, of how the world remembers what it has lost through the rhythm of its telling. Every retelling brings the myth back to life, not as fact, but as flame. The philosopher seeks logic. The dreamer seeks meaning. But the listener understands that some truths are meant only to be felt. And when the sea is quiet, and the stars hang heavy above the dark water. You might feel it, a whisper older than words, calling you to remember. Not the walls or towers, but the lesson. Not the riches, but the silence that followed. Atlantis fell, yes, but in its fall, it became eternal. For stories that are never found can never be lost, so we keep telling it. Softly, reverently, as though the sea itself might be listening, because perhaps, in some hidden depth, Atlantis listens back. Beneath layers of history and salt, Atlantis lingers, not as stone or ruin, but as something far more persistent. A story carried like a lantern through the dark. Every age has tried to claim it. Every empire has whispered, it was here. We were the heirs of its greatness. And so, the legend bends, reshapes itself, breathing in the language of whoever dares to speak it. Plato may have planted the seed, but it was the centuries that watered it. A philosopher's warning grew into a map of dreams. A parable became a promise. Explorers saw it as a jewel waiting beyond the horizon. Mystics called it the lost cradle of gods. Scholars traced its name on maps, letting ink and hope intertwine. But Atlantis has always stayed just beyond reach, as if it knows its power lies in not being found. For a found city becomes history. A lost city becomes legend, and legends live forever. This is why the myth moves like tidewater, retreating, returning, reshaping the shore. It is not bound to one place. It lives wherever wonder lingers longest. In some stories, Atlantis is wise and golden, a beacon of knowledge lost to human pride. In others, it is divine, a sacred land, punished by jealous gods. In a few, it is nothing more than a mirror, reflecting what we want to believe. Yet through all its shapes, its voice remains the same. A quiet warning beneath the beauty, that even the brightest lights can be swallowed by their own reflection. That greatness, unguarded, can become its own undoing. Perhaps that's why Atlantis endures when other myths fade. It's not just a place, it's a question. Where does wisdom go when we forget it? What happens to empires when they believe they can never fall? And if the sea remembers, do we? The tide carries this question like a secret. Waves roll against forgotten shores, each whispering the same soft phrase, "Do not forget what was lost." And maybe that's the true power of Atlantis. It doesn't ask to be found, only remembered. Not with shovels and maps, but with quiet hearts that still believe in something bigger than stone. When sailors looked to the horizon, when poets spoke of paradise, when dreamers closed their eyes and saw shining domes beneath the waves, they were answering its call, not to discover, but to listen. Even now, in the noise of modern cities, its echo finds a way. Through ink, through story, through you. Atlantis needs no ruins to endure. It has the ocean. It has memory. It has the hush between heartbeats where stories are kept safe. And in that silence, it is alive, not as a relic, but as a companion. A quiet presence beside humanity's restless search for meaning. One day, someone may claim to find it. a city beneath the sea, shining in the dark. But long before that, Atlantis has already been here, in every mind that dared to imagine, not as history, not as myth, but as both. Imagine, for a moment, the sea grows quiet, the waves pulled back, and the deep exhales. From beneath the weight of centuries, something vast begins to stir. Light filters down through the water, touching stone once thought lost. Columns glimmer beneath drifting silt. Golden mosaics shimmer like half-remembered dreams. And then, slowly, the ocean parts. Atlantis rises, not as ruin, but reborn. Its towers break the surface first, glistening in dawn's first light. Fish scatter like silver whispers. The sea foam turns gold. The world would hold its breath. Cameras would turn. Satellites would tilt their gaze. Every voice, scholar, skeptic, dreamer, would fall silent. And in that silence, all would bloom. For there, before them, stood the impossible, the myth made real. But if Atlantis returned, what would we truly see? Would it be the paradise Plato spoke of? Ordered, pure, a city of wisdom and virtue? Or would it be something far older, shaped not by gods, but by time? Perhaps its marble would be veined with coral now, its statues softened by tides, their faces calm in eternal rest. Roots of seaweed clinging to ancient steps, wrapping history in green silk. Imagine walking through its halls, each echo carrying centuries of silence. You pass walls etched with strange marks, symbols, stories, songs of a people who believed their glory eternal. The air tastes of salt and memory. Every stone hums faintly, as if remembering what it means to be touched by light again. Would we dare to enter? Would we study it? Or would we simply stand afraid to break the spell? Because to see Atlantis is to meet the weight of all human longing at once. It is to face the proof that myth and truth were never as far apart as we thought. In its streets, you might find marble benches where no one has sat for 1,000 years. Steps leading into pools of clear blue water, once sacred, now still. Gardens overgrown with coral blossoms, swaying gently in the new air. And at the city's heart, perhaps a great domed hall. Inside it, a throne half buried in sea glass. Not empty, but waiting. Would we claim it? Would we rush to possess this wonder, as we have possessed so many before? Or would we finally learn to simply look? Atlantis might rise, not to be conquered, but to remind that all greatness is temporary, that even beauty must sleep. And when it wakes different. Some would see divinity in its return. Others, just science. But both would feel the same quiet shiver, the sense that something ancient had forgiven us. A city once punished for pride, now surfacing into humility, not to rule again, but to teach, and maybe to listen, because the world above has changed. The skies are louder, the seas more restless. Yet, beneath it all, Atlantis has never stopped dreaming. If it rose again, it would not bring answers. It would bring reflection, a mirror of what humanity was, and what it still might become. The morning after Atlantis rose, the world awoke to wonder. Ships gathered at the edge of the new horizon. Their captains whispered, not daring to break the quiet. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath, calm, reverent, alive. From above, satellites captured images that no one could explain. A perfect circle of marble terraces gleamed through the mist. Bridges curved in sacred geometry, their angles echoing the stars. And at the center, light pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and steady. Scientists rushed to measure, historians to compare, and poets, they simply wept. For Atlantis was not merely beautiful. It remembered beauty. It carried within its stone a memory of purpose, of harmony between man, nature, and the divine. Yet, as explorers approached, strange things began to happen. Their instruments faltered. Compasses spun without reason. Even the air felt heavier, thick with unseen music. Some said it was energy, ancient technology, reawakening. Others claimed it was something deeper, something sacred, the hum of creation itself. The ocean had always been alive, they said. Atlantis was simply its voice. Divers descended along coral-coated walls. They found inscriptions, lines of symbols arranged in spiral patterns. Each seemed to tell a story, but none could be read. Still, everyone felt their meaning. Deep in the bones, it spoke of cycles of rise, fall, and return, of how every civilization is but a wave, cresting, breaking, and fading back into the sea. And in that moment, standing on the edge of myth made real, humanity felt small again. Not defeated, but humbled, because the city beneath them had fallen not from weakness, but from too much power. And now it stood as both monument and warning. The explorers reached a great avenue lined with statues, kings, queens, and scholars of stone. Their faces were serene, almost kind. Sea glass filled their eyes, like tears frozen in time. At the far end of the avenue, an archway stood open. Beyond it, a vast hall glimmered with sunlight filtering through shifting water above. And there, carved upon the wall, a single image repeated again and again. A circle divided into 10 parts, surrounded by waves. 10 kings, 10 districts, 10 ideals, each one lost when the balance broke. Scholars realized what Plato meant. Atlantis wasn't punished by the gods out of jealousy. It destroyed itself by forgetting its own heart. And as humanity gazed upon its reflection, the message became clear. This was not the story of one lost city. It was the story of all of us. For every empire, every dream of progress, every age of wonder, all follow the same path. Creation, glory, pride, and silence. But in that silence, Atlantis whispered still, not as a ghost, but as a teacher. Its walls sang softly, not of despair, but renewal. The ocean had not buried it out of cruelty. It had cradled it, protecting it until the world was ready to listen. Now, at last, it was. And perhaps that was why it rose again, not for conquest, but for connection. For in rediscovering Atlantis, we rediscover something of ourselves. The yearning to build, the courage to dream, and the need always to remember what must never be lost again. Night settled once more over the reborn city. The waves glowed faintly, reflecting the stars above and the lights below. For Atlantis, now awake, seemed to breathe again. No engines roared, no machines turned. Yet something alive moved within its stones. The city shimmered softly, as though remembering the sun. Those who watched from afar felt an ache they could not name. It was not fear, nor all alone. It was recognition, for Atlantis was not foreign to them. It was familiar, like a dream they had all once shared, a memory buried deep in the mind of humankind. The poets said the sea had returned a mirror, and when we looked upon it, we saw not marble and gold, but ourselves, our ambitions bright as dawn, our flaws deep as the ocean floor, our endless desire to touch the divine. And as the wind whispered through Atlantean halls, one could almost hear voices, ancient, kind, unhurried. They spoke not in words, but in feelings of patience, of balance, of time. One explorer standing before the central temple felt a strange calm. The air was heavy with salt and light. In the silence, he thought he understood. Atlantis had not drowned because it was evil. It had drowned because it forgot to listen. It rose again, perhaps to remind us that wisdom is not in power, but in peace. That greatness is not in conquest, but in connection. That civilizations fall not when they are defeated, but when they grow deaf to their own spirit. The explorers stayed for days, but soon the ocean began to change again. The tides grew higher, gentler, as if preparing to take back what was returned. No one resisted. They only watched. One by one, the golden spires sank beneath the surface. Not as a tragedy, but as a farewell. The waves folded over the shining roofs like the closing of a book, and as the last light vanished, the sea was quiet once more, still, endless, eternal. But those who had seen it knew. Atlantis was never gone. It lived on, not beneath the sea, but within us, in every dream of balance, in every prayer for renewal. When the world feels too loud, when cities burn brighter than the stars, perhaps that is when the ocean will whisper again, a reminder that the true Atlantis is not a place, but a state of being, a moment of harmony between what we build and what we are. And so, the tale ends where it began, with water and wonder, and the quiet promise of return, because maybe Atlantis never sank at all. Maybe it simply waited for us to remember how to rise.